She was a shy waitress, a nobody, a ghost with a fake name and a real secret buried so deep, not even the FBI could find it. He was the most feared mafia boss in Chicago, Don Raphael Caruso, the kind of man whose name made senators sweat and judges lose sleep. Tonight, he humiliated her in front of 50 people over a glass of wine she didn't even pour wrong. He thought she would apologize, shrink, disappear. Instead, Ileana Cruz looked him dead in the eye and answered him in a dialect so old, so rare, so buried in the blood of the Chicago underworld that the entire penthouse went cold. Don Raphael's hand froze on his glass, because the last person who spoke those words to him was a man he had ordered killed 12 years ago. And that man had a daughter who was supposed to be dead. She wasn't just a waitress. She was the last ghost of a bloodline he thought he'd erased. And she was the only person alive who could save his empire or burn it to the ground. Before anything else, I need your help. Without your subscription, the algorithm might hide us from each other forever. Your comments and shares are our only hope of staying connected. Subscribe now to ensure we meet again. And now let the story unfold. The 94th floor of the Monarch Tower in Chicago didn't smell like a restaurant. It smelled like power. Black truffle butter, aged bourbon, and the kind of money that doesn't apologize for existing. Ileana pulled the strap of her server apron tighter and reminded herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. You are nobody. You are furniture. At 24, she had mastered invisibility the way other women mastered eyeliner. Her dark hair was pinned back in a severe knot. She wore no perfume. Her shoes were flat and silent. She had even replaced her contact lenses with a pair of plain glass frames she bought at a thrift store in Wicker Park, just to add another layer between herself and anyone who might look too closely. Ileana, Marcus, the floor director, snapped his fingers twice in her face. He was a man assembled entirely from anxiety and hair gel. Stop staring at the skyline. Tonight is not a night for poetry. Do you understand what is happening up here? Private party, she said quietly. VIP floor, full buyout. Not just any private party. Marcus leaned in so close she could smell his fear. The Caruso family, Ileana, Don Raphael Caruso, his son Dante, and their entire inner circle. They have rented this floor for the evening. The bill will exceed $250,000. If you breathe wrong, I will personally ensure you never work in the hospitality industry again, in any city, on any continent. Ileana felt a cold wire of tension tighten around her ribs. The Carusos. She knew that name the way she knew her own heartbeat. Not from the news, not from the whispers of the city, but from memory. From the last night she had spent in her childhood home on the South Side, watching it burn from inside a drainage ditch while her mother held her head underwater to muffle her screaming. Understood, Ileana said. Water service, I'll stay quiet. You'll stay invisible, Marcus corrected. Think of yourself as a very expensive piece of furniture that can pour Pellegrino. She nodded. She was good at being furniture. She had been practicing for 11 years. In the kitchen, the line cooks were moving with the focused panic of a surgical team mid-operation. Raphael, the sous chef, caught her eye over a pan of searing halibut and mouthed, "You okay?" She gave him a small nod. She wasn't, but that wasn't his problem. Word from the floor, Raphael murmured, checking his sauce. Don Raphael is in a mood. A deal in Detroit went sideways. Lost millions. He came here to eat and forget, which means he will be looking for something or someone to make him feel like a king again. Ileana tucked that information away. She would pour his water. She would place his bread. She would be invisible. The kitchen doors swung open. A ripple of silence rolled through the staff. They were here. The Caruso entourage moved like a storm system. 8 men total, 4 of them bodyguards built like industrial refrigerators in tailored Zegna suits. eyes scanning the perimeter with the flat efficiency of surveillance cameras. The two at the center owned the room. To the right was Dante Caruso, 29 years old, 6'2" of disciplined fury in a charcoal Brioni suit that probably cost more than Ileana's yearly rent. His jaw was carved from something harder than granite, and his dark eyes moved through the room the way a chess grandmaster studies a board, calculating, cold, 3 moves ahead. A Sig Sauer P226 was undoubtedly pressed against his ribs beneath that jacket. And beside him, the Don himself. Don Rafael Caruso was 63 and looked like time had tried to wear him down and given up. He walked with a slight hitch in his left knee, a souvenir from a long-ago war, but he carried it like a decoration. His silver hair was brushed back from a face that had seen everything and judged most of it. He wore a midnight blue suit with a pocket square the color of old blood. His eyes were the deep, unreadable brown of Lake Michigan in November. Marcus nearly genuflected. Don Rafael, Mr. Dante, Monarch Tower is honored beyond words. Your table is prepared. The Opus One has been breathing for 2 hours. We flew in the A5 Wagyu from Hokkaido this morning. The bread, Don Rafael said, cutting him off. His voice was the sound of gravel being dragged across steel. Is it Sicilian? We have a rosemary focaccia. That's not what I asked. Marcus went pale. I can have something prepared. Dante stepped forward, placing a hand on his father's arm. Papa, the bread is fine, let's sit. Raphael grunted. His gaze swept the line of servers. It was the look of a man used to seeing through people. His eyes landed on Ileana for exactly 1 second. She dropped her gaze to his shoes. Italian leather, hand-stitched, she knew the maker. You, Dante said. Ileana's head snapped up. He was pointing at Gino, the head server, a man who wore his Italian-American heritage like a badge but had never actually left New Jersey. Your cologne is a problem, Dante said flatly. My father has a migraine. If you hover over him smelling like a department store, it won't end well for anyone. Gino flushed crimson. It's Armani, sir. I'm aware of what it is. Step back. Gino retreated like a man reprieved from a firing squad. Marcus looked around wildly, his eyes landing on Ileana with the desperate hope of a drowning man spotting a buoy. Ileana, he grabbed her arm. You're unscented, you're quiet, you're unremarkable, she supplied. Perfect, you're serving the Don's table tonight. He propelled her forward before she could protest. She found herself standing 3 feet from Dante Caruso, close enough to see the small scar that bisected his left eyebrow. He looked at her the way you look at something that doesn't make sense. A frown flickered behind his eyes. She's trembling, he observed, to no one in particular. I apologize, Ileana said, her voice barely above a murmur. It's a busy night. Don Rafael turned slowly and studied her. Does she have hands? Can she pour without spilling? Yes, sir, Ileana said, steadying herself. I can. The Don studied her for 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Fine, he turned toward the table. Bring me real bread, not focaccia, and the 85 Sassicaia, not the Opus One. I'm not a California man. As the entourage moved to the table, Dante lingered. He stepped close enough to drop his voice beneath anyone else's hearing range. Don't make him wait, he said quietly, and don't make mistakes, he is not himself tonight. Then he turned away, leaving Ileana to find her footing on ground that had just shifted beneath her feet. The first hour passed without incident. Ileana moved like water, appearing only when needed, disappearing the moment she wasn't. She poured the 85 Sassicaia without a tremor. She placed the charcuterie board at the precise angle that allowed each man to reach his preferred selection. She refilled the sparkling water at exactly the right interval. Never before the glass was 1/3 full, never after it was empty. At the table, the conversation was low and clipped. Numbers, routes, A name she recognized from the news, a city councilman who had recently changed his vote on a zoning bill in the South Loop. She kept her face neutral and her ears open. The trouble started with the soup. It was a Sicilian-style zuppa di pesce, the chef's interpretation, a seafood broth with fennel, saffron, and local Lake Michigan perch, garnished with a drizzle of Calabrian chili oil and a slice of grilled sourdough. Ileana set it down before the Don with practiced grace. Don Raphael picked up his spoon. He tasted it. He set the spoon down. "This is not Sicilian," he said. The table went quiet. "Papa," Dante started. "The fennel is wrong. The broth is wrong. This is a New England chowder wearing a Sicilian costume." He pushed the bowl away. "Get me the chef. I want to explain to him personally what sacrilege tastes like." Ileana stepped forward to remove the bowl. She should have kept her mouth shut. But her hands stopped. She looked at the broth. She could see the color, a deep, burnt amber that came only from real saffron, not the cheap powdered substitute most kitchens used. She could smell the fennel, not the bulb, which was common, but the fronds, which were specific and correct. And the perch, Lake Michigan perch, had a particular sweetness that actually complemented the Calabrian heat in a way Mediterranean fish did not. Chef Dominic hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a choice, an informed, intelligent choice. He didn't deserve to be humiliated for it. Ileana put the bowl back down. "The fennel is fronds, not bulb," she said, her voice quiet and steady. "The distinction matters in the coastal tradition. The fronds carry the anise without the sweetness that would fight the saffron, and the saffron is Sicilian. You can tell by the color Spanish saffron pulls orange. This pulls gold." The table went absolutely still. She realized, a half-second too late, that she was no longer speaking English. She had slipped without thinking, without choosing, into the dialect. The old tongue. Not standard Italian, not even the Neapolitan that many in the Chicago outfit still used among themselves. She had slipped into the Sicilian of the interior valleys, the tongue of the mountain families, a dialect so archaic and specific that it hadn't been spoken openly in the American underworld since the 1970s. Don Raphael's spoon hit the edge of the bowl with a faint clink. The sound was enormous in the silence. He turned his head and looked at her, really looked at her, not through her the way he had at the door, at her. "Say that again," he whispered. Ileana's hand flew to her mouth. She had exposed herself. 11 years of careful, painstaking invisibility, undone by a bowl of fish soup. Dante was already out of his chair. He was looking at her with eyes that had gone from calculating to razor-sharp. "Where did you learn that dialect?" Dante asked, his voice dangerously soft. My grandmother," Ileana said, switching back to English, her voice unsteady. "She was from the old country. She raised me. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "What village?" Don Raphael asked. Ileana's mind raced. "Near Corleone, a small place. She never told me the name." The Don stared at her. He picked up the spoon. He tasted the soup again, slowly, deliberately. "You are right," he said finally, setting the spoon down with something approaching reverence. "The saffron is correct. The fronds are correct." He looked at his son. "The chef understood the spirit of the dish, even if the fish is wrong." He reached into his jacket and removed a gold money clip. He peeled off several $100 bills and set them on the table. "For the lesson in botany," he said. "Now sit the soup, bring me the next course, and girl." Ileana paused. "Do not think I have forgotten what I just heard. I have not." She nodded and walked away on legs that felt like they were made of smoke. The service elevator was a mercy. Ileana rode it down to the private cellar level alone, gripping the railing, breathing through her nose. "You survived," she told herself. "You overcorrected. Smile, pour, disappear. 2 more hours and you're on the red line back to Logan Square and you never come back here." The cellar level was climate-controlled and silent. rows of bottles recessed into stone-finished walls. She found the 97 Macedo that Marcus had flagged for the main course and cradled it carefully in both hands. "Your grandmother was from Corleone." The voice came from behind her. Ileana spun around. Dante Caruso stood in the cellar doorway, his jacket removed, his shoulder holster visible against his white shirt. He looked like he had been assembled specifically to make women forget their own names. "Mr. Caruso," she managed, "I was just retrieving." "No grandmother from Corleone speaks the mountain dialect," he said, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "Corleone is valley. The dialect you used is from the plateau families, the educated families, the ones who kept the old language alive on purpose." He stopped close enough that she had to look up at him. "I spent summers in Sicily as a child," he continued. "I know the difference, and I know something else." He reached out, not touching her but gesturing toward her hands. "Your hands aren't a server's hands. No grease burns, no dish soap cracking. You take care of yourself, Ileana, which means this job is a costume, not a life." "I use gloves," she said. He almost smiled. "You're quick, I'll give you that." He stepped slightly closer. "Are you working for the outfit? Did Morty send you? Because if someone planted you here tonight." "I am not a plant," Ileana said, her voice sharpening despite herself. "I came here to pay rent and avoid being noticed. I am very sorry that I failed at the second part." He studied her face the way a forensic analyst studies a crime scene, searching for the inconsistency that breaks the whole story open. His eyes dropped to her collar, where the edge of a thin silver chain was visible. "What's on the chain?" "Nothing." He reached for it. She caught his wrist. The silence that followed was electric. Dante looked down at her hand on his wrist. He looked back at her face. Something shifted behind his eyes, not anger. Something more complicated and far more dangerous. "Dante," a voice boomed from the elevator. It was Rocco, his head of security. "Your father is asking for you, and the woman Marcus says she has the wine." Dante held Ileana's gaze for one more beat. "This conversation isn't finished," he said quietly. He turned and walked away. Ileana exhaled slowly. She looked down at the silver chain. She tucked it deeper inside her uniform shirt. The pendant that hung from it was a small, heavy medallion. On one face, an eagle with its wings spread. On the other, a crown of olive branches. The Cruz family crest. Her father's seal. The main course arrived at 9:15. Ileana served it with hands that were now entirely steady. She had moved past fear into the cold, clear country beyond it, where everything slowed down and details sharpened. The A5 Wagyu, sliced thin and seared tableside on a banciatan grill. The truffle risotto. The grilled broccolini with Calabrian anchovy butter. The men ate with the measured appreciation of people for whom food was both pleasure and status. Dante was watching her. She knew it without looking. She could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. She moved to refill the water glasses on the far end of the table, positioning herself naturally so she was facing the room. It was instinct. Her father had taught her never to put her back to a space she hadn't cleared. That's when she saw it. A man at the service bar on the opposite side of the room. He wasn't drinking. He was watching his phone, but his eyes kept traveling upward toward the windows. He was wearing a vest beneath his jacket. She could see the bulk at the chest, and his posture was wrong. He was coiled. Ileana's gaze moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Chicago skyline. The Monarch Tower sat at the edge of the loop, and the building directly across was the Meridian, a mixed-use tower with an open observation terrace on the 48th floor. She saw it. A single point of light, still focused. A scope. Don Raphael was sitting directly in front of the window, raising his wine glass. Time collapsed. "Down!" Ileana screamed. She dropped the water pitcher and lunged. Not for the Don, he was too far, too heavy, but for the 400-pound serving cart beside the window. She hit it with her shoulder at a dead sprint and drove it sideways, the crash of silver and crystal deafening, the cart tipping and sliding between Don Raphael and the glass just as the window exploded inward. The bullet hit the overturned cart with a sound like a thunderclap, sending silver dishes spinning across the floor. Chaos. Dante had his father on the ground behind the cart in the same instant, his body covering the Don's. The bodyguards drew their weapons, two dropping and covering, two moving toward the service bar where the man in the vest had reached into his jacket. "Shooter on the Meridian Terrace, 48th floor, north face," Ileana shouted, her voice cutting through the screaming. 3 seconds later, the man at the service bar took 2 rounds to the center mass and collapsed. Then silence, except for the wind coming through the shattered window and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Ileana was on the floor, her back against the overturned cart, one hand pressed to her shoulder where she'd hit it. It wasn't dislocated, she'd know if it was, but it would be a spectacular bruise by morning. She looked up. Dante Caruso was crouched in front of her. His gun was holstered. His father was behind him, alive, upright, pale as ash. Dante looked at the shattered window, at the cart, at the bullet hole buried in the silver side panel, exactly where the Don's chest had been. Then he looked at Ileana. "You saw the scope," he said. "Yes." From across the room, through a window in the dark. "The angle of the light was wrong," she said. "It was too still." Dante stared at her for a long moment. "Rocco," he said, not looking away from her, "we're taking her with us." "No," Ileana said, starting to get up. "I saved your father, that's all. I want to go home." "You knew about the hit before the glass broke," Dante said, his voice hardening. "Which means you either recognized the threat because you were trained to, or you recognized it because you were part of it. Either way, you're not going home tonight." Don Raphael stepped forward. His face was composed now, the shock burned away by something older and harder. "You saved my life," he said to her. "In 40 years, only 3 people have done that. 2 of them are dead. The third is my son." He tilted his head. "Come with us. I have questions. You will answer them, and then we will decide what happens next." Ileana looked at the shattered window, at the body on the floor, at the city blazing below, indifferent and enormous. She looked at Dante. She had no more cards to play. "Fine," she said, "but I want my bag from the break room first." The Caruso compound sat on 14 acres in Lake Forest, 40 minutes north of Chicago on the edge of Lake Michigan. It looked, from the road, like a very serious private school, stone walls, manicured grounds, iron gates that required 3 separate authentication steps to open. Inside, it was something else entirely. Ileana had been here once before. She'd been 7 years old, riding in the back of her father's town car, looking out the window at the estate through the trees as her father drove past and said, quietly, "That was the enemy's house, Ileana. Always know where the enemy lives." She hadn't expected to be walking through the front door. The interior was all dark wood and cold stone, lit by amber sconces that made everything look like an oil painting. Staff appeared and vanished without sound. The security was layered and invisible, she could feel it, the way you feel a current in still water. Dante moved her through the house with a hand at her elbow that was not quite force and not quite courtesy. He dismissed the doctor who appeared to check on the Don and directed the man to tend to Ileana's shoulder instead. The doctor was professional and quick. Her shoulder was bruised, not broken. He wrapped it, gave her a painkiller she didn't take, and left. Then Dante closed the study door, and they were alone. The study was lined with books, real books, not decoration. A fire burned in a stone hearth big enough to park a car in. The desk was an antique partner's desk, the leather on its surface worn to a warm caramel by decades of use. Dante poured bourbon into 2 glasses and handed her one. He leaned against the desk, crossed his arms, and regarded her. "My tech team ran your face the moment you corrected my father's opinion of the fennel," he said. "Your ID is excellent. Whoever built your legend knew what they were doing. It held for 3 databases before it started to crack." Ileana's fingers tightened around the glass. "There is no Ileana Miller born in Milwaukee in 1999, Dante continued, his voice even and unhurried. "The social security number belongs to an infant who died in the NICU at Frottert Hospital. The high school records are fabricated. The apartment in Logan Square has 3 months of utility payments, nothing before." He set down his glass. "So, who are you? Who built you a new life? And what are you doing in my city?" Ileana looked into the fire. She thought about lying. She had so many lies prepared, stacked like weapons in an armory. But the tech report had stripped her cover to the studs, and the woman who stood here now in the home of her enemy, with her shoulder wrapped and her hands finally steady, was tired of lying. She was so tired. She reached inside her shirt and pulled out the medallion. She held it out toward him. Dante looked at it. She watched his face, the careful architecture of his composure, begin to fracture. "That crest," he said very quietly. "You recognize it." An eagle and a crown of olives. He looked up from the medallion to her face. "That is the Cruz family seal." "Yes." "The Cruz family was destroyed 11 years ago," Dante said. His voice had gone flat and careful, the voice of someone navigating a minefield. "Miguel Cruz ran the South Side until your father had him killed," Ileana said. "Along with my mother, my uncle, and 14 members of our household, on a Tuesday night in March. I was 13 years old." She held his gaze. "My name is Ileana Cruz. Miguel Cruz was my father." The room went so still that she could hear the fire eating the wood in the hearth. Dante's face had gone pale beneath his dark complexion. He was looking at her the way you look at something that cannot exist and yet clearly does. "We were told the daughter died in the fire," he said. "I was in the crawl space under the kitchen floor," Ileana said. "My father built it himself. He told me, if there is ever a night when everything goes wrong, you go to the kitchen, you pull up the 3rd board from the stove, and you stay there until dawn. So I did." Dante pushed off the desk. He paced to the window, his back to her, looking out at the dark grounds. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "If you've spent 11 years hiding from us, why save him tonight? Why save my father?" Ileana stood up from the chair. "'Cause when I saw that rifle scope, I didn't see Don Rafael Caruso," she said. "I saw a man about to be murdered from the shadows, and that is how my father died. And whatever he was, whatever my father did or didn't do, that death was wrong. And it was wrong tonight, too." She met Dante's eyes across the room. "My father raised me to understand the difference between war and murder. What happened in that penthouse tonight was murder. I stopped it because that is who I am, not because of who you are." Dante stared at her for a long time. Then slowly, he walked back toward her. He stopped close enough that she could see the exact color of his eyes, which were not simply dark but a deep, complicated brown, like deep water over dark stone. "Ileana Cruz," he said softly, "do you know what happens if my father finds out who you are?" "I have a reasonable guess." "It won't be reasonable." He reached up slowly and brushed a strand of dark hair from her face. His touch was careful, almost reluctant, as if he was doing something against his own better judgment. "But he's not going to find out tonight, because tonight you are Ileana, the woman who saved his life, and that gives you a debt from this family that no one here would dare dishonor." She looked at him steadily. "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," Dante said, "we figure out who tried to kill my father, and why. And you," his jaw tightened, "you are going to help me. Because whoever sent that shooter knew our security protocols, which means the leak is inside this house." From somewhere deep in the compound, A door opened and closed, and the sound of a cane on stone tile moved steadily down the corridor. Don Raphael. Dante looked at Ileana with an expression of sudden, urgent warning. Not a word about your name. Not yet. Do you trust me? Ileana considered the question. She thought about the fire, about the crawl space, about 11 years of silence in a borrowed life. She thought about the way Dante had covered his father's body with his own, before his gun was even drawn. I trust your debt, she said. That's enough for tonight. Dante almost smiled. It transformed his face in a way that was, briefly, devastating. Fair enough. The doors opened. Don Raphael entered, his cane quiet on the thick carpet. He looked between the two of them with the eyes of a man who had built an empire on reading rooms correctly. The shooter on the roof has been handled, Don Raphael said, settling into the chair beside the fire with the deliberate care of a man whose body has paid for his ambitions. The man at the bar is dead. We have his phone. He set a sealed evidence bag on the desk. Rocco's team pulled the messages, the coordinates of my seat at that table, my security rotation, times. He paused. Details that only 3 people in this organization had access to. Dante picked up the bag without touching the phone inside. He looked at it. Who are the 3? Ileana asked. Both men looked at her. She held the Don's gaze and didn't flinch. You saved my life, Raphael said. You've earned the right to a question. He held up 3 fingers. Rocco, my consigliere Sal Mancini, and my captain Enzo Baron. Enzo, Dante said immediately. Enzo was late arriving tonight. He said he had a conflict. He also requested the security rotation last week, Don Raphael said, under the guise of a routine audit. He's been moving money, Ileana said. Both men looked at her again. The man at the bar, she said. He was wearing a vest and he was watching his watch. He wasn't nervous. He was waiting for a signal. Someone in the room was supposed to give it. When the shot was fired and the shooter missed, the man at the bar was going to finish the job in the confusion, but only if the person coordinating him confirmed the Don was still a viable target. She paused. Did Enzo leave the room in the 3 minutes before the shot? Dante's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone and checked something, looked at Rocco through the glass of the study door and held up 3 fingers. Rocco checked his tablet and nodded once. He went to the bathroom, Dante said. 3 minutes before the shot. He hasn't been seen since the evacuation. Don Raphael's face didn't change, but his eyes went to a place that had no warmth in it at all. 40 years, he said quietly. I trusted that man for 40 years. He turned to Rocco, who had appeared in the doorway. Find Enzo. Bring him to the warehouse on Cicero Avenue, alive. Rocco vanished. Don Raphael sat for a moment in the silence. Then he looked at Ileana. I owe you more than money, he said. You corrected my palate, you saved my life, and you identified my enemy. He studied her. I want to know who you are, truly. Ileana felt Dante's attention sharpen beside her. She took a breath. She thought about her father's voice, about the medal around her neck, about 11 years of being nobody. I'm someone who grew up knowing this world, she said carefully, and who chose to leave it. I'm not an enemy. I'm not a spy. I'm a woman who wanted a quiet life, and tonight it became unavoidably complicated. Don Raphael stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his son. Dante said, She's under my protection, Papa. I'll vouch for her. Something passed between the 2 men, a long, layered look, the kind that carries the weight of a lifetime of shared understanding. Don Raphael nodded once. Then she stays, he said, until I decide otherwise. He rose from the chair, leaning on his cane. I'm going to bed. My heart has had enough excitement for a Tuesday. He paused at the door. The girl, Ileana, you have the instincts of someone raised well. He didn't look back. Whoever raised you did a good job. He left. The fire crackled. Ileana let out a breath that had been compressed inside her chest since 9 o'clock that evening. "That's as close to a compliment as he gives," Dante said. "I know," she said. "My father used to say the same." Dante looked at her. The question was in his eyes, patient and persistent. Not yet, she thought. She was not ready to hand him the last secret. Not in the same night she had already given him her name. Chapter 8: The Truth and the Cost. He came to her room at midnight. Not for anything reckless. He knocked. He waited. When she opened the door, he held up 2 glasses of water and a look of complete seriousness and said, "We need to talk, actually talk." She let him in. They sat on opposite ends of the small sofa near the window. Outside, Lake Michigan was invisible in the dark, but she could hear it, that specific sound of a large body of water breathing, the same sound she had grown up with on the south side. "I know your name," Dante said. "I've known since the cellar. The crest confirmed it, but I recognized you before that." He looked at the water in his glass. "I was 19 the night my father's men went to the crew's compound. I wasn't there, but I knew it was happening, and I didn't stop it." Ileana said nothing. "I have lived with that for 11 years, he said. "I told myself it was war. I told myself your father had made choices that made it inevitable. I told myself a lot of things." He looked up. "And then tonight you ran into a flying piece of glass to save the man who ordered it." "I told you why I did it," she said. "I know." He set down his glass. "What I want to know is what you want. You didn't spend 11 years hiding to keep hiding forever. What are you building? What are you working toward? Because a woman with your training and your instincts is not working as a waitress because she ran out of options. She's working as a waitress because she's watching and waiting." Ileana looked at the dark window. "I want my father's name cleared," she said. "There were things said about him after the raid, that he was an informant, that he was selling to the feds. It wasn't true. I have documentation, letters, my father's private records." She turned to look at Dante. "I want the record corrected, not publicly, in the circles that matter. I want the people who knew him to know the truth." Dante was quiet for a moment. "That's all." "That's everything," she said. He studied her. "Why would you trust me to do that?" "I don't yet," she said. "But you just told me something true that cost you something to say. So I told you something true in return. That's how trust starts, isn't it?" A silence settled between them. Not an uncomfortable silence. The kind that happens when 2 people are recalibrating their understanding of each other. "Your father was not an informant," Dante said finally. "I suspected as much years later when the details didn't add up. The accusation came from Enzo." He looked at her steadily. "It was Enzo who convinced my father that Miguel Cruz had turned. It was Enzo who built the case. And tonight, it was Enzo who tried to put a bullet in my father's chest." Ileana felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for 11 years. "Enzo framed my father," she said slowly, "so that my father would remove the one man on the south side who had the power and the loyalty to stop Enzo from expanding his own operation. Your father wasn't a threat to the Carusos. He was a threat to Enzo." Dante's voice was controlled, but barely. "I did not know that when I was 19. I know it now." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the lake breathed. "When Rocco brings Enzo in," Dante said carefully, "you should be there, not to participate, but to hear it confirmed, to hear him say it. And then you decide what you want to do with the rest of your life, with the truth, with—" He stopped. "With what?" He looked at her directly. The firelight from the corridor caught the angle of his face, and for a moment she could see past the underboss, past the calculated control, to something more complicated and more human underneath. "With wherever this is going," he said quietly, "whatever this is." Ileana looked at him. The enemy. The man who had not stopped what happened to her family. The man who had covered her name, protected her life, and just handed her the truth she had spent 11 years trying to find. Nothing about this was simple. Nothing about this was going to be simple. I don't know what this is, she said honestly. Neither do I, he said, but I'd like to find out. He stood, he moved toward the door. At the threshold he paused, his back to her. For what it's worth, he said, your father raised you exactly right. He left. Ileana sat alone in the quiet room, her hand resting on the medallion at her chest. Outside, the lake was still breathing. Inside, for the first time in 11 years, so was she. 3 weeks later, in a private room at an Italian restaurant on Rush Street that had no sign outside and required a name to get through the door, Don Rafael Caruso sat across a table from his son, and a young woman he had been told was named Ileana Miller. He had learned her real name 6 days earlier. He had sat with it for 6 days, alone, with nothing but a glass of his best Sicilian wine and the memory of Miguel Cruz, a man who had been his adversary, and if he was being truthful, a man he had respected. He had summoned Dante after 6 days and said only, I was wrong, and Enzo is going to answer for it. Enzo had answered for it. Now Raphael looked at Ileana Cruz across the table and saw, for the first time, not a threat or a mystery or a liability, but a young woman who had survived the worst thing his world could do to a person and come through it with her spine intact. Your father, he said, deserved a better enemy than me. He deserved to lose cleanly, not to be lied into a grave. Ileana held his gaze. Yes, he did. I cannot give him back, Raphael said, but I can give you his name, in the circles that matter, as it should have been. That's all I came for, she said. Raphael looked at his son. Dante was watching Ileana with an expression his father had not seen on his face in a long time, an expression that had nothing to do with strategy or control. Good, Raphael said. He picked up his wine. Then stay for dinner. The bread here is Sicilian, actually Sicilian. I think you'll appreciate it. Ileana looked at the bread basket. She looked at Dante, who raised an eyebrow in a question. She looked at Don Raphael, who was watching her with the patient, tired eyes of a man trying in his way to do a late and imperfect right thing. She reached for the bread. Tell me about the baker, she said. And for the first time in 11 years, Ileana Cruz did not eat alone. The ghost who was supposed to be dead became the woman no one could ignore. If this story moved you, please smash that like button. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what happens next. Can a Cruz and a Caruso build something real out of blood and ash? Or will the past tear apart everything they are just beginning to find? Eternal Noir. We don't just tell stories, we keep them alive.